Never would I have predicted that Bubba Thurston would be walking through that door. Never would I have predicted that. This happened, oh my Lord have mercy, well over 3 decades ago. I was the chaplain at St. David's Hospital in Austin. I had the oncology unit, I had the AIDS unit, and I had the anorexia nervosa unit. Bishop Benitez, who had been rector of this church, insisted that I go through this training where one day I too could be a decent priest. So, ta-da. But, when you have those rotations, and I see Bob Weston's here, and he has a much harder job than I ever had, but all day long you work in those 3 units, and then every 4th day you're on call and you have the whole hospital. So it really is pretty rigorous. And as you can imagine, I spent most of my time in the oncology unit because it was so big. And 3 decades ago, everyone came back to the hospital for their treatments. So you came to the hospital for your radiation. You came to the hospital for your chemotherapy. And you also came to the hospital to die. Hospice was just sort of getting started. And therefore, my bosses at St. David's said, spend a lot of time with the nurses in oncology because they are burning out like crazy. It's hard work. Anyway, there I was. And into my life walked Bubba Thurston. He was from Elgin, Texas. He had been an over-the-road truck driver. He was retired now. And his wife was going through treatment. And what I learned is that all the guys who had women going through treatment would gather in the little visitors room there in the unit. And they would sit and they would talk guy stuff, and so I would, of course, join them. And of all the folks, Bubba was the most colorful. And he was always telling us about this perfect garden that he had cultivated in his retirement. And he'd also say, there's a reason Elgin is the sausage capital of Texas. And I'd say, why is that, Bubba? Because we got the best sausage. Makes sense. So anyway, this went on for a long time, and eventually I was sitting with Bubba when his wife died. She was serenely beautiful. Serenely. I'll never forget her propped up on that pillow, and if you've been with people when they die, their breathing goes up very rapidly, and then it begins to decline. I was called out last night for that very purpose. Their breathing begins to go up, and then it begins to go down, and you know you're there. And so I was with him, and his beautiful wife died. We waited on Weed Corley Funeral Home to come get the body, and then Bubba left, and he said something like, "You won't see me here again." A lot of pain there. Well, it was 2 weeks later, and Bubba Thurston was walking through the door of the oncology unit. And I said, "Bubba, what are you doing here? Did you forget something?" He said, "Pat, you can just hoe your garden so long. You can just clean the house so many times." He said, and what happened is that I started being haunted. Remembering all the guys that end up here and just need someone to talk to. And it was irresistible to me. And so here I am. I'm going to come in every other day to sit with the guys who are going through what I went through. Wow. That's the Holy Spirit. You know that's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is unpredictable. You know that? You think you're going one way, the Holy Spirit sends you so. You think you're going to be working in your garden? Forget that. You're going to be on the asphalt driving from that fun drive from Elgin into Austin 3 days a week. That's what happens. The Holy Spirit is unpredictable. But also the Holy Spirit is entirely predictable. The Holy Spirit is always going to guide you and me to love in the way that Christ loves. You want to test if it's the Holy Spirit or not? Is the Spirit calling you to love the way Christ loves? You better believe the Holy Spirit's knocking on your door. The Holy Spirit is unpredictably predictable. I got to thinking about our new friend, Becca Stevens, this week. And I've heard her speak for years, I guess 20 now. But I've never asked her to fill in the blanks. I do know this, that she was ordained much the same way that Scott and Justin and I were ordained. When you're ordained in the Episcopal Church, you have these visions of oak-paneled churches and beautiful stained glass and light coming through and the people being charmed by everything you say. Here, she's bound to have had that same vision. She was in the Diocese of Tennessee. It has beautiful churches. And here she is on her commute. She's driving through town, and for the umpteenth time, she saw this woman that had been standing on that street corner for 20 years. She saw this woman who'd been standing on that street corner for 20 years. And she saw this woman who'd been standing on the street corner for 20 years, all selling themselves. And the Holy Spirit started to haunt her and elbowed her in the ribs and said, "Stop this car and ask them to get in." That's what she did. And she stopped before each one of those women and said, "Would you like to live in a house without men telling you what to do?" And she didn't even know where she's going to put them. But there they rolled in, they hopped into her little Honda Accord, and well, now there's all sorts of beds and places. See, it was unpredictable, yes. You're going down the road this way, right? Think you're going home. You're not going home. You're going to have to take a detour. The Holy Spirit is unpredictable, but the Holy Spirit is predictable. The Holy Spirit is always going to guide you to love those the way Christ loved them. And Christ is saying, those women on the street corner, they're mine. As much as anybody in an oak-paneled church, they're mine. The Holy Spirit is unpredictably predictable. Think about Pete in that story. It's a great story. You know, Peter is at Joppa, and if you go on any of these fancy trips with Susan Lindstrom, you'll go by Joppa, but Joppa is like an exurb to Tel Aviv now. Who else knows why Joppa is famous? What? Good for you, Ruth Berg, and you win the door prize. Jonah hopped in a boat in Joppa to go to Tarshish, the exact opposite way he was supposed to be going, right? And but that's beside the point. But Ruth does win the award. So he's in Joppa. He's just called Tabitha back to life, and he says, "I just got to be by myself." He goes up to the rooftop of his friend's house, and he starts to pray. And I sort of picture him with the nice breeze from the Mediterranean hitting him in the face, and he begins to pray, and he gets lost in his prayers, which we do if we're fortunate on that day. And in his prayers, that he ends up being lost in them, he sees a sheet come down from heaven, and there's all sorts of four-footed critters on there. And I don't mean just sheep and goats and cows. I'm thinking sheep, goats, cows, pigs, geckos, Gila monsters, the whole bunch, baby. I mean, I'm talking about all of them. And then Pete hears a voice from heaven. Kill those critters and have a barbecue, you know. The Lord always talks about barbecue over and over again. But and of course, Peter says, no, Lord, I keep a kosher table, you know, so I can't do that. Nothing unclean will ever touch these lips. And the Lord remonstrates and says, Don't you call something unclean that I have cleaned. It's what Becca heard driving down the street. Don't you tell me these women aren't clean. They're mine. You pick them up. Don't you call anyone or anything unclean that I've made clean. And of course, Pete's up there thinking, what in the world does that vision mean? You should never do that with God, by the way. I'm just telling you, because the next thing he hears is, and there's a bunch of people at the door wanting to take him to a centurion's house, Cornelius's. Folks, if a Jew of that century could decide who was the most unclean people on earth, it would be a Roman centurion. Okay? It'd be, like Colonel Bob Bell. This centurion was in charge of 100 men. He had subjugated the people of Israel relentlessly, and now he wants to have religion And Pete realizes from the vision, he just says, yes, I'll go. And so Pete goes with Cornelius. Cornelius brings out his whole family. He gets all his ne'er-do-well friends. They get in the big gathering, and Pete starts telling them about Jesus who's risen. And all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit sweeps through that bunch like a California wildfire. And Pete says, I think the next step is to baptize these people. And so he does. And that's why Pete ends up in front of the bureaucrats, of James and the rest of the early church. They say, what are you doing, boy? And Pete says, let me tell you what I was doing. And they have no rebuttal to that. You see, the Holy Spirit is unpredictable. Pete just wanted to say his prayers. He just wanted to be quiet and go back to working with Jews, you know? Holy Spirit had other things in mind. Unpredictable. New road. But it's also predictable. That centurion, all his family, all his ne'er-do-well friends needed to know they were the object of Christ's love. Object of Christ's love. That's the way it works. I hope you're realizing that being a Christian is not a spectator sport. There's no armchair Christians. I hate to tell you. I'm sorry. That's out. I don't care what age you are. There are no armchair Christians. Holy Spirit won't stand for it. You can say, no, but he's going to keep bugging you. And so how do we know that? Well, you know, early in the Gospel of John, Nicodemus comes to Jesus and says, I can't get my arms around this thing you're talking about. I just can't quite get it. And finally, Jesus in exasperation says, Nicodemus, listen to me. The wind blows where it wants to, and you hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it came from or where it's going. So it is with the Spirit. The Spirit cannot be corralled. It will take you where the heck it wants to take you. It will call you when it wants to call you. It is unpredictable. On the other side, as Jesus is walking, and this is in John 2, just as he's walking from the Last Supper, and he's walking to Gethsemane, to the Mount of Olives, with his disciples. And they're all pretty sad. He says this to them. It's very telling. He says, when the Holy Spirit comes, it will glorify me by taking what is mine and disclosing it to you. When the Holy Spirit comes, it will glorify me. That's code language in John. Glorify in the Gospel of John is almost exclusively used for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. When I'm glorified, I will draw all people to me. The glorified Christ, the crucified Christ will be revealed to the disciples through the Spirit. And they will see the extent of the kind of love they're to have. The kind of love that takes Jesus to the cross. Greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. I had an occasion to experience this Friday. John Batters and I teach a Bible study, Frost Bible study, and it's here now. And we've had this guy in the class since 2002 by the name of Stephen. He says, guys, at the end of Bible study, you know, guys are always doing the kind of guy thing. He goes, you won't believe what happened. I was just in my man cave, and I was repairing a mandolin. I was having a great time. You know, Stephen's retired, 10 years younger than I am or something. Yes, but I have no hard feelings about that. But he's repairing this mandolin. He's engaged. All of a sudden, his wife frames the door and says, honey, you have a visitor. And he goes, oh, goodness gracious. But he walks out and sees that it's one of his son's childhood friends. So he kind of perks up and he says, hey, I haven't seen you for 7 years. It's great to see you. I haven't seen you for 7 years. Where have you been? And with that, the young man hung his head and said, prison. And my friend Stephen went over and just put his arms around him. Just hugged him until the boy couldn't cry, just cried it out. Then he stepped back from him, and the boy said, he's not really a boy, the young man said, I can't get a job. He says, I don't have a driver's license, I'm a felon, no one will even talk to me. And my friend Stephen, who's not a wealthy man, said, we're going to get in the car right now. We're going to drive up to Canyon Lake. I have a little lake house up there, and I got work for you to do. I got work for you to do. And so off they went, like Becca Stevens with 3 prostitutes. Well, after that, after the story, of course, you know what all the guys said in the Bible study. You know what we all ask, right? Well, what did he go to prison for? And Stephen said, I don't know. I didn't ask him.